Hello, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros, the football podcast. I am Chris Welsh. This is Week 9 rankings for your fantasy football season, the halfway marker. It couldn't be more important. So we have got to have Pat Fitzmaurice and Scott Pianowski. We've got both beside me as we are going to be hitting those Week 9 ranks. We are going to be discussing who, by the way, was at the top of the ranks for Week 8. That is a very critical thing there, Pat. I've never been more excited to talk about the top of the ranks in any of these shows this week. I can't imagine why. And then we will be hitting all the good positional stuff. We got a lot of good stuff there, Pat. Aren't you excited to talk about who was great in ranks this week?
Not really, because you're in the top 5. Scott and I are just going to clear out and let you do this as a solo show, Welsh.
But you know, Scott, last week, I think you were top 20 last week, if I have it correct, Pianowski. So I want to set the stage very quickly for this rank show. So last week, Pianowski, who wasn't on the show, top 20. We had Mick Chilela on the show. Your top 3 rankers on the Fantasy Pros ECR consensus rankings, around 200 rankers. Number 1, Mick Chilela, who was on the show last week, was number 1. Number 2, my best friend in the whole world, Scott Bogman, who I've known for pretty much more than anybody, and Pat does a show with him. Scott Bogman was number 2. Joey Wright, not to lay Joey Wright out there. Joey Wright did amazing. I'm doing all this other setup here. He was number 3. But of note, I was number 5. I was top 5 this week in the ranks, which is the best I think I've had. Erickson was 17th, and Pat Fitzmaurice, you were 19. So over the last 8 days, this show, 5 of the guys have been inside the top 20. So, hat tip to you, Pat and Scott. You got it. You're going to have to live up. And unfortunately, you're going to have to get a number 1 this week if you're going to keep the standard of Mick. So no pressure.
No, well, I mean, the key to being successful in life is surrounding yourself with good people. And so I always say these ranking shows are about discussing the players and me tweaking my rankings as I have disagreements organically with you two guys. So I think I've already put out a good set of rankings. I feel like they're top 20 rankings, but they're only going to get better after this conversation.
You've been really great this season too, on the whole, if people check that out. So these discussions are great. We are able to kind of sometimes flip for each other, and really ultimately, there's something about a blind squirrel finding a nut type of thing with me being in the top 5. We'll throw that out there. But Pat, you have been consistently good all season. Pretty good week for the Fantasy Pros rank show.
Yes, and hat tip to Joey Wright, good friend of mine in the fantasy biz. Great job, Joey, finishing top 3. And Scott, followed up his top 20 finish in week 7 with, I believe he was 31st. This week, so he didn't quite crack the AP top 25, but he was in the also receiving votes category. So here's hoping that we have another solid week.
I think it makes a lot of sense too, because I matriculated at Providence, and most of my time following the Providence basketball team, it's like they're kind of an also receiving votes team. Although some of the teams of the last 5 or 10 years, the basketball team have actually been top 20 teams and occasionally top 10 or top 15 teams, but I went to a school where also receiving votes is not a pejorative; it's actually a compliment. So happy to be linked.
And by the way, if we were doing March Madness seeding, you guys would be 1 and 2 seeds. I would be a 15 seed, knocking out a 2 for this week. But Scott, I believe you might be top 15 on the overall this year, on the overall across all the weeks. You've been doing very good. People can check it out. Also, by the way, going to fantasypros.com.
I'm virtually certain that is incorrect, but yes, it's nice to hear you say it.
I don't know. I went and looked. I feel like it was, but fantasypros.com/rankings. You can check out the week-to-week rankings across the different formats of half PPR and stuff like that. So go and check it out today, fantasypros.com/rankings. We are going to be talking about all those rankings, but I do want to give you guys an opportunity to win stuff because we give away awesome stuff here. This is your chance. It's actually your last chance for you to win a signed Justin Jefferson helmet for free, courtesy of our friends over at pristineauction.com. All you got to do is head over to fantasypros.com/contest, complete the form that we've got. You can either download the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard app, leave a review for the podcast, and you can follow us on X, Instagram, TikTok. All of those are at Fantasy Pros. The more actions, the more stuff that you do there, the more entries you have and your better opportunity to win this awesome prize. So you can do all that stuff. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the podcast. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and you can claim your prize win, that awesome Justin Jefferson helmet, my friends. Let's get into the ranks. Let's kick this off with the running back ranks for week 9. Lots of stuff. Lots of big boys to talk about in here. Let's get to the big board and let's start with the core running backs. These are the top 12. Friends, Saquon Barkley is at number 1. Kyren Williams is showing up at number 2 this week. Bijan, Derrick Henry, Ken Walker, that rounds out our top 5. We've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Devon Achane, and Jonathan Taylor. That finishes out the core, not sitting at home too long and spending a ton of time on these guys, of course. We do have a little bit of a difference, and let's talk about this one in Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara has got a smashing matchup, a matchup that made Bo Nix a top 10 quarterback last week. You've got Alvin Kamara going up against Carolina. I think he was ECR 10. He's moved to ECR 9. Scott, you've got him at 10. Fitz, you've got him at 7. You guys are maybe a little bit different on it. Scott, let's actually start with you. You're not down on Alvin Kamara, but where is it any hesitation with Alvin? Any other running back that would be in, New Orleans, or really any of these other 12 running backs, I think if you would put them up against Carolina, would probably push top 5. So maybe that'll be the question to both of you. Why is Alvin Kamara not a top 5 against Carolina?
It's just hard to forget the form that he's shown the last 4 weeks where he hasn't been better than running back 14. I get it. Look, they're playing backup quarterbacks. They get Derek Carr back. But since the first 2 dream weeks of the season, the Saints have had a lot of problems. The offensive line has collapsed. They've had injuries at receiver. Shaheed isn't coming back. We'll see what version of Olave they get this week. So the infrastructure of the Saints, also Taysom Hill, the one guy who is getting healthy is Taysom Hill, who may take away some goal line equity from Kamara. He's only got the 1 rushing touchdown the last 4 weeks. So where he's slotted, you'd have to be pretty well stocked at running back to not play Kamara. But I've been a Kamara skeptic preseason into the season. It looked horribly bad for the first couple of weeks, but I've seen just more of a middling running back too for maybe the last 5 or 6 weeks. Yes, it's about pieces around him not playing well and getting hurt, but I don't see a lot to be optimistic about in this offense. Carolina is the worst team in football, so they're going to lift all the boats, the tide that lifts all boats this week. But I'm not expecting Alvin Kamara to be a superstar the rest of the year. And I actually thought it was kind of curious that the Saints extended him an age 29 running back. I think it's just a miss when you consider the actuary curves that apply to our game.
One thing I want to throw out too there to you, Pat, and talking about Alvin Kamara. Can you believe that this offense is the same offense from the first 2 weeks that was just 40 points? And then B, do you agree with the assessment that any other running back on this top 12 list would be top 5 if they're going against Carolina this week? Push back if you don't like one.
No, let's see. Would DeAndre's there would be a lot of guys who would be top 5 against this team. But I don't know, man. It's hard to vault into that top 5 when you have to leapfrog Saquon Barkley, Kyren Williams, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson. So maybe not. And Scott makes a good point about just concerns about the overall ecosystem for the Saints. But over the first 5 weeks of the season, with Derek Carr at quarterback, Kamara was the RB2 in fantasy points per game at 21.5. Saquon Barkley was the only one ahead of him at 23 points per game. With Carr out the last 3 games, Kamara's fantasy scoring has basically been cut in half. He's averaged 11.8 half-point PPR points per game, and he's been RB27 in points per game over that stretch. So obviously his investors are delighted that Derek Carr looks to be coming back this week, and the matchup against the Panthers, obviously very inviting. The Panthers are giving up just under 30 fantasy points to running backs per game. Next most generous team, Dallas, 25. So this is the worst, I should say the best matchup for running backs by a wide margin in the fantasy game. So, I have to put Kamara in the top 7.
One more thing on this top 12 I'm curious about. We saw Devon Achane benefit a little bit from Tua coming back. A little bit is like we love to see the big volume as far as carries go, but man, does Tua get Achane back involved in the passing game? That was something that completely disappeared. Do you think Achane roughly has some of the highest RB1 upside this week? Buffalo matchup, take that for where it is, Pat. But like, do you think Achane is just completely back with Tua in this offense? Because not everybody seemed sold. I mean, Tua came back, they threw the ball, he was efficient, but Hill didn't have a big game. Waddle didn't get fully going. There are these other running backs. We had this big discussion about selling Raheem Mostert this week as they get those guys in. Do you think it's just all steam ahead for Devon Achane and he has a really high potential of beating this week's expectations?
I do think so. Low end running back one is probably the floor for Achane with Tua back at quarterback for the Dolphins. This is a high flying offense again, and Achane has that dual run catch potential. So yes, I do think he's a automatic RB1.
Remember, three starts for Tua this year, and Achane has 20 catches in those games. And we can't unsee that. Yeah,
and Scott, do you feel the same way that it's like low RB1 is like a floor to Achane's potential, like high RB1 ceiling?
I mean, the only frustrating thing for Achane managers is that Mostert vultured him for a couple of touchdowns, and he's not going to go away. I think eventually maybe Jalen Wright could have a little bit more of an expanded role. He didn't play much in week 8, but the thing is, there's room for growth. I mean, I thought Tua was okay. I didn't think he played great by any means, and it's going to be interesting to see how he's defended because they obviously wanted to get the ball out of his hands so quickly. Teams will adjust to that. Eventually, they're going to have to get comfortable taking deeper drops and letting routes develop down the field. But the bottom line is this was an unplugged offense with the back. They were one of the worst set up backup teams at quarterback in the league. Thankfully, we don't have to watch those guys now. Hopefully, they can keep Tua healthy. But Achane he can be. I think we throw out like league winner and league tilter, needle mover and all that stuff. I don't think there are that many guys who really deserve that tag. He's one of the few I would actually put in that bucket.
By the way, can I dream here? Can I give a dream scenario of like, can we move Raheem Mostert to the Dallas Cowboys? Can we just have Mostert there in his value and then just unleash a little bit of Jalen Wright and just more usage to not be vultured for Devon Achane? Please, in the fantasy world. Trade deadline next week, by the way. Be on the lookout for that. Tuesdays have been a hot trade market out here when Deontay Johnson got moved. So who knows what the NFL has in store for us or if we ever see a running back.
I'm so glad we live in a world where they make trades because, it was not that long ago, the trade deadline was a dud. And now it's like teams are actually willing to make moves. And it's been an unusual year with all the receivers getting hurt. So teams had to make receiver moves. I'm not sure Baltimore really did. We'll get to them at the wide receiver position, and the Carolina fallout as well. But, the other leagues have fun trade deadlines. The hockey deadline is fun. The basketball trade deadline is fun. The baseball might be the king of them all. They devote like shows to just tracking that. Yeah. And the football, it's always been a big yawn. Herschel Walker was traded a million years ago. There was the Eric Dickerson trade. But teams had gotten so scared to make moves, and now teams aren't scared anymore. And not only that, I think the bad teams in the NFL are now realizing it's like, okay, we're going nowhere with Deontay Johnson. Let's get something. They got very little for him, but that's better than nothing. He's not a part of your next good team. Probably David Tepper probably isn't a part of their next good team either, but I digress. So yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see what might happen. And it's just fun to make up, let's get this player on this team, this player off that team. Let's clear a congestion at a position at one place, or let's fill a spot where they desperately need somebody. Yeah, it's
trade deadlines like Kevin Garnett. It's anything is possible now. So I think that's what he said. All right, let's go to RB2s. 13 through 24 in the RB market. We got DeAndre Swift leading the pack there at 13. Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, Kareem Hunt, followed by David Montgomery, Tony Pollard, James Conner. Brian Robinson comes in at 20 on the big board. Chuba Hubbard, Chase Brown, J.K. Dobbins, and Ramondre Stevenson. Those are our RB2s. Some interesting stuff in here. I mentioned this a lot. We have this really cool tool. Simplistic. There's advanced tools across the board, but if you're looking at the ranks page, sometimes you can just get an easy grade. I think it's really helpful. And then they've got the matchup rating for that week, and we use a 5-star system for the ratings. We have 1 5-star back this week, by the way, Chuba Hubbard going up against the Saints, which Saints are on the bottom tier of rushing yards given up per game. But on the inverse, there's a couple 2-star ratings in here, and one of those is Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs has got a 15. He's 15. He's got a 2-star rating on here. Pianowski, you've got him a little bit higher. Fitz, you've got him a little bit lower. Fitz, let's start with you. What's got you down on Josh Jacobs a little bit?
Well, the matchup is one thing. The Lions are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. They're one of the 3 teams who have allowed less than 500 rushing yards to running backs this season. And I'm kind of projecting this that Jordan Love doesn't play, although we got a report from Ian Rappaport this morning that Love is determined to play against the Lions, but the Packers are sort of known for being really cautious with their injured players, and they have a week 10 bye. So if they do sit Jordan Love out for this one, they can, presume that they're going to get a reasonably healthy Jordan Love coming out of their bye in week 11. And I don't know, maybe if Jordan Love did sit and it was Malik Willis starting at quarterback for the Packers, that would mean a pumped up workload for Josh Jacobs, but maybe not, because when Love missed week 2, after he hurt himself in Brazil, sprained his MCL. The next week, Josh Jacobs had 32 carries against the Colts, season high. But then the following week, I thought he was going to have another big volume week, not so much against the Titans. He only had 14 carries. So I think maybe Matt LaFleur is cognizant of not running Josh Jacobs into the ground. And they've got 2 other pretty good backs in Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks, who's actually looked really good lately. So I don't know, just the tough matchup. Plus, if they are going against the Lions with no Jordan Love, that Josh Jacobs is not going to see a light box the whole game. Like, he's going to be running against 7 and 8 man boxes throughout. So I'm a little cautious about Josh Jacobs, even though it is possible he gives us 25 carries this week.
Scott, Josh Jacobs or Kareem Hunt this week?
Yeah, I'm going to go Jacobs. Let's remember when Love did get hurt last week, they just went full on Jacobs. And I know what teams do in the middle of a game isn't always the same as what they do with a week to prepare. I also just want a hat tip to Matt LaFleur, right? In a year where teams have struggled with quarterback problems and backups needing to play, Matt LaFleur has just put on a masterclass. And okay, Jordan Love's our future. He's our superstar. We paid him and all that. But Malik Willis, who's been on the team for 15 seconds, will actually be fine with Malik Willis. I know some of the matchups were favorable to get through. I mean, you beat an Indianapolis team that's not that great. You beat Tennessee. They get past Jacksonville last week, who's been a disappointment. So it's a much bigger test against Detroit, and they're a pretty good run-stopping team, even without Aiden Hutchinson. And heartbroken that Aiden Hutchinson isn't part of this Lions team because they seem to have everything else clicking right now. But we're always trying to figure out volume, and we're always trying to figure out offensive play callers we trust. And I just feel like Jacobs has 20 carries in his back pocket. Yeah, it might be a 20 for 69 type of game, but I think he also has goal line equity. He will do something in the passing game. And I'm just at the point where I just trust Matt LaFleur to come up with something. So because of the volume floor, the volume projection being so high for Jacobs, that's why I have him maybe ranked a little bit more than the consensus.
One more RB2. We're not going to sit at home in the RB2s too much either. We're going to put more of a hyper focus this week into that flex RB, if you want to call it RB3 range. I do want to ask you guys about one player. I had put him in the buy-sell trade show, but there might still be this opportunity that this week creates one of the last selling windows. But I'm really curious at your take on it. And Scott, we'll start with you. It's Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard has the best matchup. It's a 5-star matchup. The only others are James Cook and Alvin Kamara inside the top 24. So from a matchup perspective, it's great. But one of my reasonings on moving off of Chuba Hubbard, not just Brooks coming back, but Bryce Young makes this offense worse. Like, it's all bad. Andy Dalton wasn't doing much for it, but I don't feel optimistic about what this team is going to be able to do moving forward. And maybe at some point they'll just let it fly and things will change because Chuba's been good. But Chuba, they've got one of the worst offensive teams, horrible defense. And then you've also got a young back on a team that is blown up that's going to be coming and probably taking away. So I view Chuba Hubbard in this sell window right now, but this is a great matchup this week. So what do you think the upside for Chuba is this week with that version of the offense going up against the Saints? Like, do you think he can be top 15 or higher and is an absolute must-smash play this week?
Yeah, he oddly got taken out of the game so quickly in week 1 against the Saints, that, back when the Saints were an offense that we're excited about. But I've long been a Hubbard guy. I've speculated that maybe it's going to be a lost season for Brooks. But the problem is Andy Dalton is like the donut in the back of your car. You have a flat tire, you put it on, you can go 100 miles, 150 miles. You can't go cross country with it. Bryce Young is the flat tire. You can't go anywhere with Bryce Young, right? I mean, one of my under picks actually died last week when he engineered a meaningless touchdown drive in the final minute. So thank you, Bryce Young. Of all the times to actually do something productive, you did it to take a couple dollars away I'm eating at McDonald's this week as opposed to a steakhouse. So thank you, Chuba. And McDonald's is a sponsor of the show. Hey, I'm loving it. You have a great app. But the problem with trading Hubbard, I think it's plausible, it's reasonable what you outline. But I think the person you're trading him to is like, you have to have them come to Hubbard. You can't be like, hey, I'm ready to trade Chuba Hubbard. You have to throw your entire running back board. I have good depth here. Anybody here interest you? Any of the matchups are good for you this week. Let them come to Hubbard, because if you offer Hubbard, they're going to smell a rat. They're going to think, oh, yeah, I know Bryce Young stinks. I know they have a bye coming up in 2 weeks. I know that eventually Brooks will probably come back. I still think Chuba Hubbard's a good football player. We're talking about players to trade, by the way. You talked about Mostert being traded. I would love to see Hubbard on a good team. I think he could be a really good player. And running back onboarding is not anywhere near as complicated as other offensive positions. So you can just kind of plug and play with a running back. Can we get him on a contender? Man,
yeah, I send everybody to the Cowboys. I'm trying to send everybody to the Cowboys. So I'm like Chuba, Raheem Mostert for sure. Pat, same thing with Chuba then. I feel like the rank almost looks low compared to his volume for this season and this awesome matchup. But I think, the rankers see the offense as well. Just your take on Chuba. Is this like a no doubt smash start this week? Could you put him in over David Montgomery, who's a couple spots higher? Just your take on Chuba.
I could not. I've got him at RB23 this week because I'm terrified of the Bryce Young-led Panthers offense. And that concerns me more than any threat posed by Jonathan Brooks. The Panthers have no incentive to give Jonathan Brooks 15 to 20 carries a week all of a sudden. I mean, coming off a torn ACL in his first year with the team, going absolutely nowhere. Wouldn't be surprised if it was something close to a redshirt season for Brooks, and maybe he gets a little bit of rotational usage down the stretch, but I am very worried about Chuba Hubbard. I think I dropped him 4 or 5 spots in rest of season rankings this week just because of the quarterback change. Maybe once Dalton is healed, he goes back in, but the Panthers, I think, they're at a crossroads with Bryce Young. They have to figure out whether he can be salvaged or not.
We're going to be talking about our flex running backs 25 through 36, the big depth here. There's lots to do. But before we do, let's talk about touchdowns, because a roller coaster of an NFL season, it's moving right along, and it promises to be a month full of tricks, treats, and of course, touchdowns. And at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, it's the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Running it in from the 1 or an 80-yard bomb, we don't care how they score touchdowns. We want to bet them. We talked about the highest upside running back of the week, Devon Achane, plus 135. You love the plus money because he can do it on the ground or he can do it in the air with Tua. What is that, 20 targets, 20 receptions he's had with Tua since being there? It's a great bet. You guys can get in on the action and score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. And here is a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5. You can get $250 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. RBs 25 through 36. We start with Tank Bigsby up against Philly at 25. We've got Bucky Irving, Alexander Mattison, Nick Chubb, Rachaad White, Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert is at 30. We go to Javonte, Rico Dowdle, Austin Eckler, Tyler Algier, Zach Moss, and Devin Singletary. What are we getting Devin Singletary in there for? All right, we got a bunch that we're going to get through here. Pat, we're going to start with you. Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving's got an ECR of 26. Scott has got him at 28. You have got him at 32. The ever-evolving Buccaneers running back situation. I don't know. I thought we kind of got a little bit of an answer last week, Pat, that the rusher is still Bucky Irving. And guess what? He is also the guy that's still going to be heavily involved in the receiving game, even without those big receivers. Not that Rachaad White was a slouch or anything like that, but have you pushed all the Bucs down with Bucky Irving?
Yeah, Bucky's been really impressive this season, and I don't like being this far below consensus on a player I think is good. But Bucky is sharing work with Rachaad White. He's only at double-digit carries twice this season, and he's topped out at 14 carries. So there's sort of a usage ceiling for Bucky, although he does get involved in the passing game, had a season-high 7 catches last week, and maybe that sort of sticks since maybe the Buccaneers need a little more from their running backs in the pass catching department with no Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin. But the matchup against the Chiefs is not a good one. I mean, the Chiefs defense has quietly just been lights out this season. They've allowed a league low 353 rushing yards to running backs. So Kansas City's giving up 50.4 rushing yards per game to running backs at 2.97 yards per carry. I don't like the matchup, and I don't like that we're not going to get a full workload.
Yeah, it's a bad matchup, Scott. That's like the big thing, because I'm with you on a little bit higher of the Bucky Irving over. I think it was 16 touches between the 7 catches and 9 carries he had last week. I love that volume. What I don't love is what this Buccaneers offense looks like right now. And Kansas City is a monster against the run, and he is the more primary of the actual rushers. So what's your take on Bucky Irving this week?
Yeah, I think the one thing you can feel good about, well, 2 things. One is that his receiving role was vastly expanded, right? He hadn't had more than 3 targets in a game, and then he catches all 7 of his targets only for 40 yards, but that volume is so important. But also, Evans saw his role decrease significantly last week. So it's whenever you look at backfields, we're always trying to reduce a backfield from 3 to 2. And it looks like maybe Tampa Bay is going to go back to Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, and there's not going to be, Tucker. There's not going to be a third running back that they incorporate for a significant role. Sean Tucker, I meant to say, I said Evans, but we'd love to have Mike Evans back. We're going to wait a few more weeks on that. That's a key to backfields. You get to reduce from 3 to 2. When you can do that, you can play both guys proactively. And Baker Mayfield did not want to throw to his receivers last week. He didn't have really any rapport with those guys. He felt comfortable throwing to White. He felt comfortable throwing to Irving. We know Cade Otton was basically looking like Tony Gonzalez out there. I think those are going to be the throws that Baker relies on in this game. The Chiefs will probably have a lead. Tampa Bay will probably be playing backup, catch up. And I don't see any reason why I think both their running backs are going to combine for like 12 catches on Monday.
I agree. Take the over. I'm going to be looking at taking that over a show. Let's talk about Alexander Mattison. He's got ECR 27 on the list. I think last week it was Kansas City. Rough matchups have been there for Mattison. One of the biggest problems with Mattison in general, though, I titled him the Mark Andrews of running backs, because he is touchdown dependent if you're going to get really good volume or any actual scoring out of him. And he does get some of those touchdowns. We've got the ECR 27, Scott at 31, Fitz at 29, maybe a tiny bit more optimistic. But Scott, let's talk to you real quick. Do you think Mattison is solely and wholly touchdown dependent in this matchup to put up anything fantasy relevant?
I'm there to some extent. I at least looked 4 straight games with double-digit carries. He's had at least 14 in every game. I don't think he's a great receiver by any means, but he's had, 17 catches in his last 15 catches in his last 4 games. I can still do SAT math. So the fact that Zamir White can't play, I don't think Mattison's a special back, and his yards per carry has been tanking most of the year, but he's got, 15 to 20 touches in his back pocket. The Cincinnati defense is nothing that I fear. So I feel pretty good about the volume. I would give him maybe 35 or 40% chance at a touchdown. That's a playable running back too for me.
And he's playable, Pat, because he's the guy. We have less question of Zamir White taking away volume. Mattison has been the volume play here. What's your actual level of comfort? You did get him inside the top 30. I'm actually curious who you have right below him, but what's your comfort level on Mattison this week, especially putting him in at flex?
Yeah, right below Alexander Mattison for me this week, the 2 Buccaneers running backs, Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, Rico Dowdle, Tyler Algier. So for me, I think it's more than just TD dependence, Welsh, because over the month of October, Alexander Mattison has averaged 16.5 carries, 3.8 catches, 20.3 touches a game. That is workhorse usage. The only thing is being a workhorse for the Raiders doesn't mean that much. Over the month of October, he's been the RB32 in fantasy points per game, half-point PPR. But with just 1 point more per game, he'd be in RB2 range at RB24. So I'm falling back on the volume here, even though it's been largely empty volume for him over the last month. And this matchup against the Bengals is nothing to fear. Their run defense is 25th in DVOA. So I think it's a playable matchup. And, he's getting volume that you can at least feel comfortable about. It gives him a fairly sturdy floor, I would say, for fantasy.
Speaking of Rico Dowdle that you mentioned, Rico Dowdle, ECR 32. You guys are a little bit split. To be fair, you guys both have him as like the flex, in that 30. You don't get outside the 36 range. But this is a pro Rico Dowdle for Fitz, maybe a negative Rico Dowdle for Scott. Scott, let's talk about maybe your concerns with Dowdle in general. All the running backs are bad. It doesn't matter if they bring up Dalvin Cook; they're all bad. But it's like, is Rico Dowdle good? Which is more? Are they all bad, the other guys, or is Rico Dowdle good? I don't know if any of that equates and works well together. But we do know Dowdle has been the best of that group. So how much do you trust it this week? Because you're a bit negative on him.
Yeah, I mean, at least teams make changes when they're losing. Dallas gets their doors blown off against Detroit. They have a bye week, and then they play a game cosmetically close by final score. But I thought the 49ers pretty much controlled that game. And Zeke Elliott is on the final lap of his career. I don't think Dalvin Cook has anything to offer. So if any back on this offense can get to 10 to 15 touches, it's Dowdle. But he's not explosive. He basically gets what's blocked. And this is not the Dallas offensive line that we've been spoiled by over the last maybe 5 or 10 years. I think I have actually in a below average group. So Dowdle is more, if you need to play him, if you're backed in a corner, I could do it. I can't view him as any kind of a proactive pick. Atlanta's actually been pretty good keeping the running back fantasy points down as well. And I don't think Dowdle is anything special as a receiver either, though he may have 3 to 5 targets in this game. If you have to play Dowdle, that's fine. I realize I'm not giving you a lot of help there, because if you have to do something, you're going to do it. But again, can I be proactive with him? I'm sure a lot of the start-sit questions I ask where Dowdle's a reasonable option, I'm probably going to be picking the other guy.
And Dowdle, people feel burned from Dowdle last week with that, that inactive and everything. But Pat, Erickson's kind of pro Dowdle, putting him in as a buy right now, because moving forward, assuming that the Cowboys in the next week don't make any type of RB move, Zeke is not working. Dalvin Cook doesn't look good. Dowdle looks like the guy. Do you think there's some upside play this week with Dowdle up against Atlanta?
I do. I mean, you would have to imagine that if he does play this week, assuming that illness that caused him to be a kind of a late scratch last week against the 49ers, assuming that doesn't linger, Zeke is averaging 3.1 yards per carry. Dalvin Cook looked out of gas last year, and even with Dowdle out last week, they still only gave him 7 touches, Dalvin Cook last week against the 49ers. So I would have to imagine that Dowdle is going to get volume. We saw him get 20 carries just a couple of weeks ago. So you would hope that would be the case again. Not wildly confident about his outlook for this week, just because the Dallas backfield has been such an empty vessel this season. But I don't know. As far as a mid-range RB3, yeah, I know I'm going to be rolling with him in like 2 leagues this week. I'm not excited about it, but hopefully something clicks.
So when I was going through the list of these guys, the last guy I mentioned, I went Devon Singletary, and I Devon Singletaried it because Tyrone Tracy has been great and was great, but he's questionable with a concussion this week. So that would be, by the way, your answer to why Devon Singletary is looming around there. I think if there was no concern whatsoever, probably wouldn't be a lot of Singletary ranks. So let's talk about it in general. Tracy ended up around like in the mid 40s right now as you're listening. I'm not going to give you the actual number because he is going to wildly change between the next couple days. But it's in the 40s right now. Singletary is higher than him. Let's talk about where you guys are going to have Tracy if he is good to go. And then if he's not, what you're going to do with Singletary. And Scott, let's start with you. You have a high pre-rank RB2 range of Tyrone Tracy this week if he plays. Let's go through that, and then let's talk about if he's out in Singletary.
Yeah, I'm prepared to bump Tracy into the teens if he's confirmed, because they showed their hand against Pittsburgh. I mean, it was almost entirely the Tracy show. And I would view Singletary, first of all, needs Tracy not to play. But they talk about Tracy playing, but maybe he'll be limited or maybe he'll be a timeshare. That's not good enough. I can only play Singletary, and I have more Singletary shares than I would care to admit. He needs Tracy to be out of this game. He was pretty decent against Washington. He had a 13.5 point showing in week 2, a very strange game where the Giants lost their kicker and they couldn't kick any field goals. And that's all Washington did that game. It was the Austin Seibert show on the other side. But Singletary is never going to be a home run. When you're playing him, you're hoping for a single or a double, maybe a hit by pitch, something like that. And I realize he has that history with Dable back in Buffalo. He was really good last year in the second half of the year when he took over that Houston backfield. But the Giants are desperate. They need to play who they perceive to be their best players. And I just don't think I think Singletary is basically a drop if Tracy's healthy. Just right now, Tracy is not healthy. So we will hold on to Singletary. But the moment Tracy illustrates that he's ready to go, I think the Giants have shown their hand. So if Tracy's out, Singletary becomes, you can use them because you're hurting at running back, or the bye weeks have hit you in a bad place. You're a Najee Harris manager. Maybe you have some of the San Francisco backs, but unfortunately, I don't see a lot of upside for Singletary going forward.
Yeah, Fitzy, you got him at 20, so you're high on Tracy. So if he is fully active, are you going to go higher, or is this representative of the rank? And then what I'm curious about is if Tracy do you think this Singletary rank is representative of people just hedging? Because if Tracy is officially out, where do you think Singletary moves to? So apologies for asking you two questions.
No, that's okay. I have Tracy at RB20, and yeah, I might go up a spot or two if he plays. Like he's looked so phenomenal, explosive, powerful. We know he can catch passes. He was a former college receiver at Iowa before he transferred to Purdue. So just he has looked like the total package. Devin Singletary is ridiculous package. And if Singletary plays, like if Tracy doesn't play, and I think there's a good chance he doesn't play, I think it's less than 50-50 that guys clear concussion protocol if they sustain the concussion on one Sunday, and going into the next Sunday, it's less than 50-50. He got the concussion on Monday, so probably that takes him under 40%, 30% clear protocol. I would have Singletary as a next-door neighbor like Alexander Mattison, Rico Dowdle, mid-range, it's his show.
Perfect. Friends, you guys can find more of those ranks over at fantasypros.com/rankings if you guys want to check it out through the week. And I would remind you, don't forget, you guys can check our weekly start and sit live stream on YouTube, where you can come and ask specific start and sit questions, and we'll be with you every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So for those listening on the podcast, go to youtube.com/fantasypros, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified of all of our weekly live streams. That locks in our week 9 running backs.